This year has been hard, to say the least. We are all dealing with grief, some of it shared, some of it deeply, deeply personal. That truth laid bare this week in an essay for the New York Times by Duchess of Sussex Meghan Markle, in which she shares the story of her own pregnancy loss, writing, "I felt a sharp cramp. I dropped to the floor with my son in my arms, humming a lullaby to keep us both calm, the cheerful tune, a stark contrast to my sense that something was not right. I knew as I clutched my firstborn child that I was losing my second." Markle goes on to describe her private grief before tying it to the moment we are all living through and the grief brought on by everything from the isolation of this pandemic to the increasing political polarization of this country. With me now, Elizabeth Holmes. She's a journalist and author of HRH, So Many Thoughts on Royal Style. And Marisa Renee Lee is the CEO of Beacon Advisors, co-founder of Supportal, and author of the forthcoming book, Grief is Love. Marisa, why is it still so taboo? Why is there still so much stigma around sharing a pregnancy loss? And to, the Duchess's point around expressing grief in general.
First of all, thank you for spending some time this evening on this topic, because I think it's really important. And I think given this moment that we're in where, we've already lost over 260,000 Americans, we need to be having more conversations about grief. I think it's a hard thing for people to talk about because how we define it isn't really accurate. We think about grief in the moment immediately after we lose someone we love, but really grief is this repeated experience of learning how to live in the midst of an immense loss. The loss of my mother was massive. The loss of my pregnancy, also massive. And I think it is particularly hard, and I give so much credit to people like Chrissy Teigen and Meghan Markle for sharing their stories, because, I know from my experience, it felt different from when I lost my mother, because it also felt like a personal failure, honestly.
Yeah, Marisa, you've always been so generous about sharing those pieces of your life. And Elizabeth, that brings me to the point that this piece would have been profound and generous, even if it were, a person who was not a royal who wrote it and shared it. But how does it further nuance the conversation when you take into account just how public she is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I first saw this piece before dawn here in California on Wednesday morning, and it reminded me of all the times I had woken up to other royal news, to news of a royal birth, to news of a royal pregnancy. And it struck me immediately what Meghan had done here was to share this moment, to share her pain and how unique that was, because the royal family, while not, they're certainly a very public entity, they don't divulge a lot of their private lives. And for Meghan to open up about the suffering, about the feelings that she and Harry were having, especially in this year, I think resonated on a really deep level.
Yeah, Marisa, there is both the personal and private grief, and then there is this pivot that she makes in the piece to what we are all going through collectively, whether that is the loss that has been experienced around COVID-19, whether that is the death of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. She opens up the conversation, and I wonder how you see those various threads as ultimately weaving together.
It's all connected. I've written a lot about racism as another form of grief. And we know that she is someone who has also experienced racism and bias. And I'm sure, when she referenced Breonna Taylor, I know she also had to be thinking about herself and about so many other women of color who carry a lot. And one of the things that I have learned through my experiences with grief personally, and also thinking about, the collective grief that we're feeling globally in this moment, is that, the more that people carry, the folks who unfortunately are most vulnerable in our society, who are most marginalized, those are the people for whom it is that much harder to heal. And so I hope from, a policy perspective, one of the things that we might take from this moment of grief and, hopefully collective healing is that, healing shouldn't be a privilege. We should make sure that things like therapy are accessible to everybody, because we're going to need it. There are millions of Americans in pain right now.
Elizabeth, Merkel reflects on the importance of checking in on each other, how emotional she became when an interviewer last year asked her, "Are you okay?" Why was that moment so significant? Because I remember hearing it, and as a newish mom who's clearly has not a fraction of the public profile, not a fraction of the pressure that she is under, it resonated so deeply with me. I wonder what you make of that moment.
Yeah, that was our first glimpse into how Harry and Meghan were feeling. I mean, obviously they had been through a lot, and certainly they were on tour. It was an exhausting time. And to hear her say, to hear her tear up, and say, and sort of struggle to answer that question. And so for her in this moment now, a year later, in a much different position, for her to come forward and say that again, to urge people to ask themselves that, to ask their friends and family that felt very royal to me, because it's a call to action. It's time to sort of step up and check in. And it's a very, very simple question, but coming at such a complicated time, it's a really profound one.
Marisa, I only have about 30 seconds left. In addition to asking, "Are you okay?" what is it we need to be doing to check in on those we love?
We need to learn to hold space for people's pain. We need to continue to show up when things are most uncomfortable for the people we care about. Whether it's the quick "Are you okay?" text, sending a little note, or a gift, just find a way to make someone else feel seen. They need it.
Elizabeth and Marisa, thank you both. 53 days until Joe Biden takes